Welcome to the Pacific Research Institute's Next Round podcast. I'm Rowena Itchon, Senior Vice President, and with me is Tim Anaya, Senior Director of Communications.
Hi, Ro.
So our guest in this podcast is Anne Marie Schubert, District Attorney for Sacramento County. She recently led a lawsuit which included 3/4 of the DAs in the state to block the governor's emergency rules to expand good conduct credits that could eventually bring the early release of 76,000 inmates, including those that have committed violent crimes like domestic abuse and rape and murder. And, against this backdrop of rising crime in California's major cities. So I looked this up, Tim. Los Angeles reported a 40% increase in homicides, Oakland 36% jump, San Francisco and San Diego 17 and 10% respectively. This data was gathered by the PPIC. So Tim, you've seen how the state's approach on crime has evolved, or perhaps I should say devolved over the last 2 decades. How do you think this has come to pass? And do you think it's because progressives rule the state now?
Well, it's stunning to think if you look back 10 years ago in 2011, California still had a pretty tough on crime reputation as far as laws on the books and criminal justice policy. People forget in the 2010 election, Kamala Harris, the first time she ran for California Attorney General, she only won by a handful of votes statewide over then Los Angeles District Attorney Steve Cooley. And what we've seen over the last decade is an unprecedented shift away from tough on crime, public safety protections. The push started when Governor Jerry Brown was in office, and even though he had been Attorney General, he used the excuse of our tremendous budget crisis at the time to put in what's called AB 109 that started this trend of shifting or offenders who are convicted of what you and I would consider to be very serious crimes back into local communities. And the local communities, they didn't have the training or the manpower to take in these offenders. So it's been de facto early release. And then on top of that, you had these ballot measures, Prop 47, Prop 57, that further weakened our tough on crime public safety protections. And one of the things, there are good sides to legislating by the ballot box, and there are bad sides. And in this case, meaning when there are what we hope are unintended consequences in the law or loopholes in the law, you can't actually correct them in the legislature. You have to go back to the voters to get their approval. There were several measures, several provisions, and District Attorney Schubert talks about these in our interview, little loopholes around various sex crimes that would be considered non-serious, non-violent offenders under these measures. Anybody would agree that these are serious offenses and that these, weaker provisions shouldn't apply to those offenders. But, Democrats in the legislature and Governor Brown, still to this day, jealously guard those reforms, so-called, that they passed, and they refuse to make any changes, even when they might agree in making the changes. Most recently, we had a ballot measure last November to try to fix some of these unintended consequences. It went down in flames. So I don't know if the voters have really shifted attitude. That could be some of it. Is it progressives are dominant in state politics? That's certainly some of it. I think it's also a money thing. There's a lot of money that groups, you hear a lot about George Soros trying to influence district attorney races and sheriff's races around the state. There's a lot of money from the left to push these liberal changes and fend off any changes to restore tough on crime public safety protections. And now we're at this weird point of not only don't we have prison overcrowding, it's been proposed that we close 2 prisons, and some groups are proposing that we close as many as 10 prisons in the state. So this would have been just unfathomable a decade ago. And what you're seeing, the impact of all these changes is the rise in crime rate that you're seeing. And if you read Kerry Jackson's book from a few years back, Living in Fear in California, you see the impact of these changes and the history of these policies statewide and in all of our communities. There's a whole bunch of unintended, maybe, consequences and real life impacts that people are experiencing because of this radical shift in these laws.
Well, we have a newly appointed Attorney General, Bonta, and what I'm reading is that he's mostly focused on racial justice, ferreting out crimes within the police force and the enforcement agencies. Another thing I read that he's focused on is trying to expand the Bureau of Environmental Justice to better target polluters. Not seeing a whole lot about trying to protect public safety.
It's an afterthought in everything that Abanta or these new so-called progressive DAs, George Gascon and Chesa Boudin, you never hear them talk about protecting public safety or ensuring that justice is served for crime victims and their families. It's all about weakening laws, letting offenders off the hook. Let's go after, corporations and evil polluters. But it seems to me that they're really dropping the ball on their most important duty as a prosecutor, and that's ensuring that justice is served.
Well, we'll see what Californians have to say about this. The recall effort is underway, as you know, with George Gascon, another one with Chesa Boudin in San Francisco. Well, so there's a lot of disaffected Californians, and of course the victims' families are spearheading this effort, so we'll have to see what happens. So thanks everyone for joining us on this very important issue. So here's Anne-Marie Schubert. Anne-Marie Schubert, welcome to PRI's Next Round podcast.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it very much.
So we're so pleased to have you join us on the podcast to talk about public safety in California. So let's start with an immediate crisis that you are at the forefront of trying to prevent. The Newsom administration recently announced it was increasing early release credits for 76,000 inmates. Paint the picture for us. What types of inmates could be released if the governor's plan is carried out? And how quickly will some of these inmates be set free?
Well, it's a significant change. It has a massive impact on public safety, statewide. It has a massive impact on crime victims' rights. And it has a massive impact in terms of the number of people that are eligible. So with the exception of people serving on death row or life without parole, every other inmate will get these credits if they're not set aside. So it's 76,000 of the most serious and violent individuals in state prison. I think most folks understand that over the last 9 to 10 years, we've reduced the prison population really by almost a half. So we're well below what people call the cap. It's murderers, it's rapists, it's child molesters, it's human traffickers, it's people that commit domestic violence and have very serious records. So it's a very dangerous part of the population. So in terms of how soon, the question I think, Roanna, was how soon will we see this? We'll see it as soon as these credits are applied and the inmates have served the time that they would be allowed. So these credits. So for instance, what I think is particularly troubling is, for instance, most individuals in the state of California, when I ask them, do you think domestic violence is a violent crime? I think pretty much everybody says, of course it is. It's domestic violence. Well, it's not. And under the penal code, it's not. So that means that somebody that has a serious record and has been convicted of felony domestic violence, that person can get out now as early as half of the time that a judge sentences him or her to. The same would be true for human trafficking or rape of an unconscious. So these are individuals that have, by a judicial order, earned their sentence. And now, because of these regulations, absent them being set aside, will have this extraordinary, really kind of get out of jail card in half your time card. So it's very concerning to public safety.
Anne-Marie, what's the administration's rationale for pushing this proposal? In your view, is this more about alleviating prison overcrowding, or is this about saving state budget dollars, or is there another agenda at play here?
I think there's multitudes of agendas. I think, if you tell the public you're going to close a bunch of prisons, the way you get to that end game is you let people out. I mean, it's not like people have stopped committing crime. I mean, unfortunately, we have very significant upticks in violent crime across California, and those people must be held accountable. So I think some of it is the philosophies of perhaps the administration that, if you just let people out early, then you get to your end game. I mean, listen, every elected DA or prosecutor in this state that is a real prosecutor understands the need and the desire for rehabilitation. We all want that. People unfortunately commit crimes and they go to prison, but we all want those that are going to come out. We all want them to get the programs, the services, the needs met, so that when they come out, they become productive members of our community and don't reoffend. But what's happening with these regulations and some of these agendas is that there really is no accountability. There's very minimal accountability is what I should say. And really, we're abandoning victims because, when that domestic violence victim had the courage to report and stand up in front of a judge and tell a jury, and then the judge sentences that person, that domestic violence victim had some faith that the system would have some kind of truth in sentencing. And really, that's what we're seeing, is that there really is no truth in sentencing. We're just, if you just continuously tell people, we're going to give you credits for essentially staring at the wall, that's really not rehabilitation. That's just behaving without committing any problems. That's like me telling my kid, well, I'm going to give you an allowance for doing nothing. And that's a concern. I think people support, obviously we support rehabilitation, and credit earning is one thing that can help drive rehabilitation, but giving credits to people for just sitting in their cell doing nothing is not enhancing rehabilitation or public safety, in my opinion.
So you recently joined with 40 other DAs from across California in petitioning the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation to repeal these controversial regulations. What are you hoping the Newsom administration will do, and what response have you had from them so far?
Well, we actually have 44 elected DAs that have now joined this fight, that we represent well over 20 million Californians by our jurisdiction. So it's a very, very significant step. I don't know if we've ever had a situation of this many DAs coming together to challenge something like this. We have initiated the first part of this by sending a letter, a petition to corrections to set these regulations aside and actually have a full, fair, and transparent process. As far as I know, we haven't gotten any response back from corrections. We heard some media responses from the governor and corrections, but the next step will be in very short order of actually filing a lawsuit to have a judge make a decision on whether or not these regulations should be set aside.
So this latest early release move comes on the heels of action taken last year to grant early release to thousands more inmates under the guise of fighting the COVID-19 pandemic. So collectively, how are these mass early release orders impacting the safety of our communities? And what are you seeing from your perch in Sacramento County?
Well, I think if you talk to public safety officials and law enforcement, we know that violent crime is up in our communities. We know particularly if you look at cities like San Francisco and Los Angeles, it's kind of off the charts. The shootings are off the charts. And you add in things about, like, for instance, this massive EDD scandal where billions of dollars have been stolen from the government, essentially, and the good people that are entitled to EDD. So billions of dollars have been stolen by inmates, by people on the streets that are working with the inmates. And now we've got massive illegal guns on the streets of California. And in my opinion, I believe that there's a very high correlation. Listen, you got all this money flowing in the hands of individuals that don't really want to follow the law. And so now we've got illegal guns and we've got violent crime. So I think it's almost a tsunami of events that have occurred, not the least of which is COVID was here. It provided, a reason to let folks out. And some of it I completely understand and appreciate, but we've got our handle on it now. There's no more emergency to justify these massive releases of people that are really quite dangerous individuals.
So another controversial issue is the push for a zero cash bail policy in California, which was rejected by voters last November. The Judicial Council enacted a temporary zero cash bail policy last year during the COVID-19 pandemic, and many sheriffs around the state have reported increases in a variety of crimes because of the temporary policy. What was your experience with zero cash bail in Sacramento County, and what is your message to state lawmakers who are working this session to try to enact so-called bail reform legislation?
Well, Rowena, you're 100% correct that last year Californians rejected this outright elimination of cash bail. Now, there are many of us in this industry, including me, that agrees that we need some reforms because we don't want to penalize people that can't get out on bail because they're poor. That's really an injustice within the system. But we also have to recognize that there are dangerous people that are arrested, and we have to have some measure of assessments of them. So one of the concerns, in Sacramento County, with the uptick of violent crime, the uptick of illegal guns and firearms on the streets, and really the fact that zero, the pandemic is really, we're now recovering from it. We've gone back to our court and we've asked them to modify that bail schedule, that zero bail schedule, because really right now it's just so many people are getting out without any conditions, and that creates a dangerous situation. So we've gone back to our court. We've asked them to modify the bail schedule, and they have done that. They're going to take a long-term plan at relooking at that, which we support. But again, across California, public safety and DAs, law enforcement have gone back to their courts and asked them to modify that. Now, there is a recent court decision called the Humphreys decision that essentially says we can't base somebody's bail, if they don't have the ability to pay, we have to set the bail in accordance with that. But we can set conditions, and we have to look at other things like public safety. And those are things that we're now modifying so that we can make sure that when people get arrested, that we have conditions in place. And some people are still going to stay in jail. Let's be clear about that. But there's many factors that are going into this now, not the least of which is, this recent court decision, the fact that we're coming out of the pandemic. What I do not support, and which some lawmakers, including former Assemblymember Bonta, is this complete elimination of bail without any conditions. That includes people that are repeat offenders. So there's very serious concerns about some of these bills because there's no risk assessments, there's no conditions. If you keep violating, there's a very small class of crimes that you can set bail on. But when you look at things like domestic violence, those are particularly dangerous types of crimes. And so we want to have much more thoughtful input when we start trying to have these policy discussions, rather than just a wholesale release of individuals that can pose a serious risk to our communities.
Let's turn to the state budget. So the Newsom administration has announced the upcoming closure of 2 state prisons in Tracy and in Susanville, and they're reportedly weighing shutting down up to 5 prisons, and it's estimated that could save about $1.5 billion annually. Some say that doesn't even go far enough, and they're pushing for the closure of 10 prisons. So whether 2 or 10, how would closing these prisons impact the pursuit of justice in California? I wonder, would closing prisons complicate all the court-mandated efforts about reducing prison overcrowding? And could you see even more early release if we go down this path?
Well, let's first be clear. We're not overcrowded at this point. The federal court, we're below what's called the 3-judge panel cap. There's been extraordinary efforts since really AB 109 in 2011, I think it was, that we've reduced that prison population. One of the things that is bothersome to me is this claim of savings. Well, yeah, if you let people out of prison, it doesn't cost money, but what is the cost to society? So, when somebody's doing these fiscal analysis, they're not including the cost of victimization. They're not including the cost that our business community is suffering, including the fact that many can't even get insurance anymore because theft is so rampant. And there's so much concerns about damage to their property. So they're not including the cost to that, construction worker who had his tools stolen, who can no longer go do his day job. They're not including the cost of the person who loses the use of his car because the car was stolen. And so there's so many costs that are no longer being accounted for. And then you just think about the victimization, for the domestic violence woman who suffers a skull fracture, who doesn't have insurance and has to go to the hospital because she was beat up. No one's considering that cost of healthcare or mental health services or the PTSD that person suffers. So I find it disingenuous when we don't talk about all of it. And that's been one of my biggest things about much of public safety is let's just be honest about what we're talking about. Let's be honest about the cost of victimization. There's a bill right now that says, when the prosecutor wants to send somebody to prison, we have to put on the record how much it's going to cost, in terms of housing and all that. Well, let's just put it all on the record. It's very one-sided if we're not telling the whole story. So, there are some people in this state and in this country that think we shouldn't put anybody in prison. And unfortunately, since the beginning of time, people hurt each other and people kill each other and people molest and they rape. And some people need to have accountability and be put in prison, not just because of the crime they committed, but because of the danger that they pose in the future. And so whether you want to talk about 2 prisons or 10 prisons or all prisons, we as a society must not only hold people accountable, but we must protect the community. And just the wholesale release of inmates and the closing of prisons doesn't make us safer. And without a balanced system that, provides accountability, provides rehab, and provides assurances that releasing these folks is actually safe and it's still holding them accountable, then we're not really going to have a balanced system.
Sacramento has undergone a major shift in criminal justice policies over the past decade with controversial laws like AB 109 and Props 47 and 57. There have been countless anecdotes across the country about more car break-ins and rampant shooting. We've all seen repeat criminals slipping through the cracks and commit additional serious offenses. What have been some of your experiences in Sacramento? And are these misguided laws making it a lot more difficult for you to do your job to keep the community safe?
I think what we're seeing in Sacramento is common to what we see other places. You see some places that it's much more rampant. So for instance, in San Francisco, you can't even go there without people are concerned about their cars being stolen. They have to put notes in their cars. Please don't break into my car. Really rampant property theft. But the other thing that people need to understand, because oftentimes folks on the other side will say, oh yeah, it's down, crime's down, this is down. Well, just because crime is not reported does not mean it's not happening. And one can really look at, like, for instance, what's happening in San Francisco. So I suspect, especially now because of Prop 47, some people don't even report theft anymore. The commercial industry doesn't report it. It's a very rare incident. And let me just talk about 47 for a minute. And I was, I have been a vocal critic of that. Now it's the law and we obviously follow the law, but the theory behind Prop 47, I understand it and appreciate it, because the theory was, well, people that steal have drug problems. We want people to get help with their drug problems. So let's just reduce consequences. Let's just not, let's make all these crimes, drugs and theft, basically misdemeanors. And so now we're in this world where if I decided today that I just wanted to rip off 5 stores, I can go to 5 stores and rip off, walk in boldly and brazenly and just say, I'm going to steal $900 from Target. I'm going to steal $900 from Walmart. Then I'm going to go down the street and steal $900 from Kohl's. And then I'm going to go down and walk into Raley's and rip off $500 of whatever. And the fact is that you can do that, and the only consequence is a ticket, essentially. It's a misdemeanor. And so maybe I have a drug problem, and maybe that's why I'm stealing. But if you tell me those consequences are going to be essentially a ticket, then why am I going to go get help? So we as prosecutors, while we all understand the need for drug treatment and we want people to get drug treatment, if you have no ability to hold people accountable, then why are they going to go actually get that help? So for instance, I give this example often, which is, if I tell my child, honey, I think you should, you did something wrong. I think you should spend a week in your room and really thinking about it. But the other option is that you don't do anything. What do you think he's going to do? I mean, it's the basic concept of humanity. If there are no consequences for misbehaving, they're not going to change behavior. And so, anybody that's been in the business long enough understands that to deal with root causes that, we have, unfortunately, this massive problem of drug addiction. People are overdosing in the streets. We're seeing fentanyl. People are dying in the gutters. It's awful what's happening here. And for us to help folks get them back on track, it really demands 12 months, 18 months, whatever the experts are telling us. It's not telling them, well, you can go in and do 5 days of picking up litter, or you can do a 12-month treatment program. We know the 12 months is better for you, but which one are you going to choose? And they're obviously, we have lost our ability to help people. And before Prop 47, we had really extraordinary drug courts across California that were really quite successful. We don't have that ability anymore. And so we see these initiatives that a lot of money is put into, and then you tell people that we're going to help solve, what do they call 47? Safe Streets and Neighborhood Act. And all people need to do is wonder, are we really safer? Are our neighborhoods better? I mean, even in Sacramento, I don't even know if we've gotten any money from Prop 47 as the county, maybe a little bit, but not these alleged millions and millions of dollars to help people. And so we have to ask ourselves, are we really helping people? Are we really making us safer? And I think the answer to that question is no.
So, Marie, more recently, we've certainly seen your colleagues in Los Angeles and San Francisco garner headlines for certainly a unique approach to their jobs, one might say, and pursuing what seems to be more, a political agenda than maybe what's in the best interests of justice and public safety. How do you view their, controversial approach? And, there's a lot of fear that maybe others like them might be elected in other parts of the state. What do you think the impact would be on the safety of our communities if their approach spreads to other parts of California?
Well, I mean, I reject this concept that they're progressive. I think they're reckless. When you look at Los Angeles, what Gascon did on December 7th was, honestly, I find it despicable, because if really, he's abandoning crime victims' rights. He's abandoning public safety. He really ought to just go work in the public defender's office, because that's really what he's doing, is doing everything he can to help individuals that commit crimes, and doing essentially nothing to help people that are victims. And we're talking about, there's so many of these policies that he's adopted. And the same is true to a large extent in San Francisco, because the DA there, again, he was a public defender who then, gets a bunch of money and gets elected. And now he's doing everything he can to help people get out of jail, as opposed to, represent crime victims. So these are very, very dangerous policies. When you look at violent crime, particularly like, let's say you take Los Angeles County, people need to understand that those policies are failing the communities that we serve. When you look at LA, probably 75%, last statistic I saw, 75% victims of violent crime are African Americans and Hispanics. And so when people are victims of violent crime and your DA is saying, so sorry, we're going to side with the criminals, how is he helping those communities? In fact, it's destroying them. I mean, how is it that you have a district attorney who says, I'm not only going to support people getting out of prison for murder, I'm not going to send prosecutors to parole hearings. I'm going to abandon crime victims. Why is it in the first ever that I am aware of history of this country that a DA's union has to sue their boss to follow the law because he wants to just essentially not hold people accountable? So it's shocking what's happening. It's disturbing. It's dangerous. And there's no question, if we don't stop this madness, it's going to spread, and it's going to endanger all of Californians, not just where it's just happening right now.
And Maria, as you've shown in your pursuit of the Golden State Killer case, you've been an unflinching advocate for justice and for crime victims. But these massive public safety policy shifts seemingly put their thumb on the scale of what's best for criminals at the expense of the interests of justice. So in this charged political climate that we're in, what can be done to swing the pendulum the other way and ensure that justice for crime victims and their families is a guiding principle of California's public safety laws?
Well, I think the most important thing is that the public needs to understand what's happening. I think they're starting to. I mean, I've often said that sometimes people, until they're personally affected by crime, they're not engaged in the public policy debate because it's not affecting them. But now I think people are starting to recognize now, you see news reports all the time, whether it's Los Angeles or San Francisco, about these devastating consequences of these reckless policies. But, for me, and people oftentimes, the other side will accuse me, oh, she's just a traditionalist and she doesn't, she wants to be tough on crime. That's actually not true. In the right circumstances, we should be tough on crime. Do I believe in rehab? 100%. Do I believe in redemption? Yes, I do. But I also believe in accountability and balance. And if, for instance, I'll give you an example of where I think the public has been misled by some of these initiatives. When Prop 57 was on the ballot, the ballot title and summary that the voters read said, allows for early release of nonviolent individuals. And my biggest beef has always been well, the public doesn't understand what the law is on nonviolence. So again, like I've said several times now, if you ask the public, do you think domestic violence or assault with a deadly weapon or rape of an unconscious is violent or nonviolent? They all think it's violent. But when you mislead the public and now they're like, what the heck is going on here? That creates confusion. I think the public is like, what do you mean by that? So I think that it behooves all of us in public safety, which is oftentimes it's important, but it's also costly. How do you tell the public? How do you get them educated? How do you make sure they understand what's going on? Well, you have to, do campaigns. You have to do PR. You have to get out and educate them. And again, oftentimes people, it's not until the victim, they are the victim of a crime or someone they know that they're like, what do you mean this guy got out in 50% of his time? That's outrageous to us. So I think for us to have meaningful criminal justice, I don't even like to say the word reforms. I think we've had many reforms, and some of them I've supported over time and I've advocated for. But the wholesale abandonment, again, of listening to both sides, we're being silenced. Crime victims are being silenced. And so unless we're willing to have an honest debate, then the system will not get back in balance. And to me, the way you do that is you advocate, you have conversations with both sides, you educate the public, and you're honest with them, the most important, because right now it's not an honest debate.
So let's finish kind of on that point with more of a philosophical question. We've seen a lot of talk in Sacramento, but mainly in Washington lately, about criminal justice reform. And boy, you're seeing, really some very interesting, untraditional political alliances forming, pushing for change. We see, on the right, you're seeing this so-called right on crime movement that has been formed to push changes to sentencing laws. So when you take a step back, how do you balance what more and more people are agreeing is, inefficient or even outdated policies with that, the most important reason, ensuring justice is served and protecting our communities?
Well, I think from a national level, I absolutely agree that having conversations about sentencing reform is an important conversation. Back in the day in California, you used to be sentenced differently if you possess one type of crime or one type of drug versus another, and that's unfair. And so we need consistency. That's changed now, but that doesn't mean we don't see some imbalance in other parts of this country. We've had many efforts in California to do sentencing reforms. We've had many passed. Some are still working themselves through. Some, in my opinion, go too far. I'll give you an example. There's a bill right now that I think it's been killed, but I'm not sure. But that was going to eliminate this one gun enhancement law and go from a harsh enhancement to basically no enhancement. So to me, I think these are important conversations. But with that being said, it has to have some balance. And where we're lacking right now is, our legislature is not really effectively taking the input of crime victims and public safety. They're just essentially ignoring us. That now we're getting ignored, or they're getting ignored, and that creates that unbalance. And I don't want the pendulum to swing back far to the right. That's not my goal. I want the system just to be meaningful balance and meaningful accountability, with also this mindset that most people are going to come out of prison someday, and we want to make sure that they're ready and they have the services and the rehabilitation services that they need.
So this is a very informative discussion. Thanks so much, Anne-Marie.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
If you like this episode, please tell your friends and subscribe to PRI's podcast at iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. And when you're on these platforms, don't forget to give us a big 5 stars. If you don't subscribe to any of these, you can still listen on PRI's YouTube page, youtube.com/Pacific Research 1. That's the number 1. Thanks for listening. I'm Rowena Itchon. Hope you'll come back again for next round with PRI.